I can't actually think of what it's called, but it was awesome. Bloody hell.
Welcome to the Settlers of Seoul podcast. This is Arius Dare. On this episode, we're speaking with Daniel Tudor, writer, author, publisher, and beer connoisseur. The conversation covers a wide range of topics, including beer, naturally, but extends to small business ownership, press freedom, and general thoughts and opinions on Korea. We have a lengthy discussion on the North Korea issue, starting at about the 29-minute mark for those of you who want to skip ahead. All right, let's jump right into it. I give you Daniel Tudor. Daniel, I think we'd start off with the most important question facing the Korean people today. Why does Cass suck?
That's about. I don't hate Cass actually at all. I drink it sometimes, but the only thing I was saying with that article was that there's not enough diversity of beer in Korea, and that kind of slightly bland lager. It has its place, in a very hot afternoon. Maybe you're sweating. Give me a cold beer. It's good for that kind of occasion. But my complaint was that the Korean beer market is really dominated by these two, and probably now three, but anyway, very big chaebol companies that...
So I'm sorry, could you back up and frame it for those of us who maybe are not familiar with your comments on beer?
Okay, right. Back in 2012, it's exactly 5 years ago now, I wrote this article for The Economist saying that North Korean beer is better than South Korean beer. And, it's true, actually. I mean, you go to North Korea, and there's not much in North Korea that I would consider very good. But when it comes to beer and rockets, probably they've got something over South Korea. Now, beer, I mean, you go to a hotel in Pyongyang, or one of the emerging places for the one of the new places for the emerging North Korean elite, the moneyed class. You'll have these bars that make their own beer. Often it's really nice, and different cities in North Korea have different breweries. You take the Air Koryo flight, they have one type of beer. You get to the hotel, they have a different type of beer. Maybe you take a trip to another city, they have a different type of beer. In South Korea, that doesn't happen. It's kind of odd that one is a ostensibly communist country, and then you come to South Korea, which is supposed to be a capitalist, a competitive. Well, it is a very capitalist
choice.
Yeah, and where is the choice? So when I wrote my article, you go to a convenience store here, and there are rows and rows of two kinds of beer. They taste the same. The price is the same. And so the article was about that. How has this situation come to be? And there were legal reasons why that was the case. There were restrictions on the activities of any small brewers. So if you couldn't store something like 100,000 liters of beer at any one time, you weren't able to produce beer and distribute it to others. You had to just produce your beer and sell it in your own bar. There was no way anyone could grow into a competitor. You ended up with these lots of very small, individual bar brewers, and then you'd have these two giant, sort of monolithic beer companies that produce one or maybe two types of beer if you're lucky. Yeah, they're enjoying very high profit margins, spending nothing on R&D, not producing different types of beer, and then just... I'm not saying they're colluding on price, but when there's two of you, you look at what the other guy is charging. Okay, well, we'll just charge the same. Otherwise, we'll get into a price war and we'll both be screwed. So let's just keep our price where it is. And so I wrote an article about that, and it caused this huge uproar in South Korea. I mean, you can write about North Korea, you can write about politics, and no one cares. But you write about beer, that's interesting, right?
But South Koreans actually care about that.
Yeah, right. Well, they definitely do. Yeah, and so do I. Frank Zappa once said, "You can't be a country unless you've got a beer and an airline." So
there you go.
That's why we need reunification. I mean, I've been on Air Koryo and I've drunk South Korean beer, so. And this is why we need reunification, because neither can be a proper country until...
Line Korean Air serving Taedong beer.
Then
yourself a country.
Yeah, that's fine.
So you write this article. Recently this year, Gordon Ramsay entered into some sort of contract. We're not entirely sure what the details are. Advertising one of these beers. I mean, I don't know why he's so high on Cass. I suppose there's a good Korea expose point that a beer could necessarily be fresh and not necessarily taste good.
Yeah. I mean, cass is what is fresh? I mean, is it cold? I mean, cold is fresh when it comes to beer. I tend to conflate the two. Any beer can be cold, right? If you put it in the fridge.
I find that the colder Korean beer is, the better.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah. No, it is, if it's not cold, it's absolutely unpalatable.
So did you when he was here, he had some choice comments for you.
He did.
Could you share what that was like, being on the receiving end of that? And did you make contact with his press team? Did any Korean media outlets kind of contact you to get a rebuttal? How did that whole process go down?
Right. So yeah, he was here on a trip to promote Cass, and I presume it was very profitable for him. But anyway, he was on a trip here, and he did a press conference, and a local journalist asked him, well, what do you think of this British journalist who said that North Korean beer is better than South Korean beer? And he went, well, I think you shouldn't listen to what journalists say, but if I see him, I'll give him a kick in the ass. Something like that. And it was pretty funny. I mean, I don't...
Did he follow through on this threat?
Yeah, I tweeted at him that night. I said, why don't you come to Itaewon? He didn't come, obviously. I don't know if Cass would let him anyway, even if he wanted to. But yeah, no, I've not met him. His size 10s or whatever have not made contact with my left or right buttock. But yeah, I mean, I'm very willing to have a drinking contest with him in London or Seoul or wherever. And if I lose, I'll happily allow him to kick my ass one time.
Just once. One cheek.
Yeah.
He can choose
which one.
Well, you certainly know beer, so much so that you decided to invest in your own beer company. Could you tell us a little bit about what that has been like, investing in a company in Korea, brewing here? I assume you brew here in Korea. And yeah, just tell us
Sure.
about the process.
So actually, we brew in mostly in the US, but also here in a place called Pangyo. No, it's been a real turning point in my life. Really wonderful experience, actually. So one day in 2013, a friend of a friend approached me saying he and his girlfriend were going to open a craft beer bar in a place called Gyeonggi-dan, which is not too far from here, of course. It was a very small place. They had some designs for it, and they were going to get they were going to get a recipe from somewhere, and then have a kind of white label thing going on. Like there was a brewer at the time who used to brew for everyone's, because there were these legal restrictions on making beer in Korea, and that guy was big enough to get over those restrictions. Nobody else could do it. But anyway, very humble beginnings. The total cost of starting the booth was something like $100,000, and we put that in ourselves. I think they were quite smart in realizing that if I was involved, then they get publicity from it, because I was the beer guy, the guy who said that North Korean beer is better than South Korean beer, and they were right. So as soon as we opened, journalists would come and want to talk to me, and then there'd be an article a few days later. Oh, that English guy who said that our beer sucks, well, he's got his own beer now, so let's see if it's any good. That kind of thing. And
what kind of feedback did you get?
Well, that it's better than certain other popular South Korean brands, shall we say. And it was great, and so it helped us take off. And then we opened another bar in Gangnam, and that one took off as well. And so it just grew and grew and grew. And for me, it was at first it was about changing beer culture or having fun. I didn't think it would be something that would make me rich. I mean, it still hasn't, because it's all on paper.
Sorry, ladies. No, but
I would hope there would be other reasons for women to be interested in me,
that's it.
No, they're not.
I interviewed on a previous episode one of the co-founders of Magpie.
Yeah.
And something I was surprised to learn about was that about 80% of their customers are Koreans. And that they see themselves really as a Korean brewery serving the Korean domestic market.
Oh, so do we. Yeah.
So that was actually my question. Is that how you see yourself as well? Is your biggest share the domestic market, not foreigners coming through?
Completely. 95% maybe. I don't know exactly, but something like that. I mean, the only foreign thing about the booth really is me, and the fact that we actually make a lot of beer overseas as well. But really, I mean, we're Korean branded. I mean, if you look at our labels, it's it's in Hangul. It's not in English usually. And our design, our layout of our bars, branding, it's aimed not just at Koreans but young Korean women, I would say. Because
all right, now I see your angle. Now I see the whole grand scheme of things here.
It's a very elaborate scheme, but
playing the long con here.
Still not successful though. But yeah. So it's not a foreign business really, and we definitely don't see it like that. My partner's a Korean. Everyone who works for us is Korean. They'll look at our business and they'll see that I'm involved. It's like a foreign business, or they'll ask, what was it like doing business as a foreigner? And actually, my partner's a Korean, and all. I just invested and got involved. Yeah, I wasn't setting this up as a foreign company. Yeah, it's not an FDI situation. It would be pitifully small initial investment. It wouldn't even qualify for that. But yeah, there wasn't lots of hardship related to being a foreigner because everyone else was Korean, and I trusted them enough. And yeah, generally, our customer base is vast majority Korean and mostly young women, I would say.
How do you find the craft beer market in Korea? Is it competitive? Do you find that it's getting saturated?
Increasingly so, yeah. I mean, it is. Yeah, I mean, when we first started, I mean, we weren't the first. I think we were the first to go really big on trying to sell to Koreans rather than break out of the Itaewon bubble. Yeah, I mean, there were companies like Kraftwerks. Then there's Magpie, of course, and I like Magpie a lot. Actually, I hope that both of us do well. But now you've got all kinds of. I mean, there's too many to name really, but yeah, there's something like 40 now, I think.
Do you think
and every week or two I'll hear about some new craft brewery or yeah.
Do you think your presence is making an impact on the big guys?
Well, I know they're aware of it because it's always in the newspapers. Any article about beer in Korea will always have something about me saying that North Korean beer is better than South Korean beer, and so they're very, very aware. And we've had approaches from big companies in Korea, like they'd like to take us over or something like that, and we're not really interested in that. But yeah, no, but seriously though, I think my partners are in this for the long run, and they want to make this a really big thing. I mean, you look at the growth rates that we and other craft brewers are experiencing. Craft beer is only 0.5% of beer in Korea, but a couple of years ago it was 0.1. I mean, it's basically doubling or thereabouts every year. Other rich, sort of advanced industrial or post-industrial, if you like, countries, say like the US, craft beer, it's been a very long-term growth story from the late 80s or the 90s onwards or something like that. It's gone from a sliver of the market to in the teens or maybe 20%. I don't know exactly how much, but it's much bigger than here. I don't think there's any reason why Korea wouldn't go the same way, because Koreans like drinking, frankly. Increasingly, there's a culture of looking for something that's not just about filling your belly or getting you drunk. It's about taste and diversity and experience, because that's what happens when people have money, right? You step up from satisfying basic needs to having your own sense of taste about something. So we're seeing that all the time with beer. I mean, we'll always get new customers, new people coming in trying. I don't like this one, but I really like that one. So that's going to be my thing. I'm going to be a stout person, or I'm going to be a super double hop IPA macho person, or something like that. And you're seeing new styles coming all the time, and beers that I've even myself never heard of are being brought into Korea. And yeah, this market is developing and growing all the time. And if you're making Cass or High, you have to be, whoa, hang on, how far is this going to go? Global brewers like the AB InBev types of this world, I mean, their response to craft beer is to just buy everyone, because they're afraid of it. I mean, they can either buy it or they can lose market share, and they don't want to do that.
They own over 50% of the American beer market.
Right. How has this been allowed to happen? But
so the same way that the Korean beer market has changed here, I'm interested how well South Korea has changed since you first got here. Our previous conversation, you mentioned that you came to Korea in 2002.
Yeah.
During the World Cup fiasco, pandemonium, craziness in a very good way.
Yeah.
Being on the ground, off and on, and now I guess, indefinitely. In what ways has South Korea changed?
I think Korea's so much more open to the rest of the world now. And I think that's probably just mainly a result of people having more money to spend and being able to travel overseas. There are more people studying, living abroad. You see more people with foreign friends or spouses even. And
so you have friends, Daniel?
one or two. I mean, I try my best, Yeah, so sometimes when people tolerate me, I do have friends to hang around with if they've got nothing else to do. There's less of a naivety about the outside world. I think the young generation here is much more like, a young generation in any wealthy democratic country. They're quite cynical. They're aware of the world. If a politician says something, or a big newspaper says something, or a celebrity says something, that their instinct is to react against it or question it. That didn't used to be the case. And among the older generation, I think that's still a kind of a willingness to accept top-down communication, which young people don't have.
Which is one reason why outlets like the Chosunilbo are still very relevant. I would say probably
completely.
Those print
more
editions,
so than a paper would be in the US or in the UK.
Precisely.
Not just as a foreigner, I don't necessarily like that expression. Always, as a foreigner, what do you think about this? As a foreigner living in Korea, things are getting better because I think you're more of a normal. You're a person now, as opposed to a foreign caricature. And still, I mean, old people will. I get old people will ask me if I'm in a cafe or in the street. About once a week, you'll get some old guy coming. Where are you from? Do you like kimchi? This kind of thing.
Do you know Doctor?
Right. But the younger generation, they know about that and they find it hilarious and ridiculous. Whereas in the past, you wouldn't get that young generation of people who would think it was hilarious and ridiculous. And there's more I can do now as well. I think when I first came to Korea, there's this understanding that if you are a Westerner in Korea, you're teaching English or you're in the US Army. Whereas now you meet people who are, I'm an architect, or I'm performing in some musical. Or, you get all kinds of people now. There are more opportunities for you here. I think you'd have to draw a distinction between being a Western foreigner and, say, someone from Southeast Asia. I mean, if you're
there is a hierarchy of
absolutely, right. I mean, if you're a Westerner here, people want to know what you think about Korea. I mean, if you're from Bangladesh and you're working in a factory, probably no one's ever going to ask you, do you like this? Do you like that? As often there's this desire for approval from people from rich countries.
That is certainly true. I wonder, though, do they really take your complaints as seriously as they would a Korean complaining? So you are a white guy, surprise to our audience. You write an article that is criticizing something that many Koreans have a vested interest in, which is beer, right? Do you find that your arguments are written off as, well, of course the white guy doesn't understand our culture. The white guy doesn't understand Korean style.
I always find that people will go one way or the other depending on their own opinion about the issue. So if I say something about politics that sounds left-wing, then the left-wing people will go, oh, look, you see, there's this foreign journalist. He's being objective. He's seeing Korea, and he's not looking at it through the kind of biased lens that we Koreans see it through. It's objective. And but then someone from the right would go, oh, well, this foreigner clearly doesn't understand Korea. But if I said something right-wing, then both those people would immediately flip their position on me.
I see. So it's used as a scapegoat, basically.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's natural, isn't it? I mean, yeah, I probably maybe we would be like that back home too. I don't know, but yeah, I think it depends very much on what the foreigner in question is saying. What their own bias is. But often, I mean, I find that I do get listened to, particularly because I'm a journalist and a writer. I've been lucky in that I've been able to write for some quite good Korean papers in the past, and with columns, you're given a platform, and when people see what you've written, if it's something that is provocative, it tends to create an outsize, it creates a storm greater than it than would have been the case had a Korean journalist said it, or maybe a Korean journalist would have felt unable to say it sometimes. I mean, there are times where I'll write something knowing that if a Korean journalist wrote this, they'd get really hammered for it. And so there's certain things you can get away with.
I see. So the Wagoginess, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Whereas on the one hand, it is maybe kind of easy to dismiss your views because, well, of course you couldn't possibly.
Yeah, you don't understand Korea. Yeah.
But on the other, it creates space for you to be contrarian, to be
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
little bit outside the conventional wisdom of things.
Yeah, overall, I would say it's good. I mean, a Korean person my age who'd been working in journalism probably wouldn't be given as much of a platform as I've been given.
How would your job be different if you were Korean? And in a follow-up question, how would you rate press freedom here, press expression, the quality of the press in Korea?
Okay, I think it's quite strongly tied to who's in power. During the Lee Myung-bak presidency, press freedom was somewhat curtailed, and then it got a lot worse under Park Geun-hye. A lot of Korean journalists will say that. And now we have a change of government. Things seem to be improving. I'm also biased myself. I mean, I didn't like Park Geun-hye. I mean, it's not just that there's this overarching press freedom issue. It's also things like, advertising in Korea is, if you've got an economy where so much of any market is dominated by big chaebols, Samsung, LG, Hyundai, all these companies, and you've got so many media outlets. I mean, there are too many newspapers in Korea. There's a ridiculous number of newspapers and news websites. They're all competing for money from a relatively small number of business and clicks, and then advertising money from a relatively small number of companies. An example to show the difference. When I was a journalist, a PR person from a very big chaebol came to me one day and said, well, if you keep criticizing us like this, then we'll pull all our advertising from The Economist. So, what are you going to do about that? My response is just, well, okay, well, you can do that if you want, because The Economist is a global magazine, adverts from big Korean companies, but we have adverts from big companies from everywhere. So if you lose even your biggest Korean advertiser, it's not really going to have a material impact on your business. But if you're a local paper here, you find that Samsung, Hyundai, LG, between them are 50% of your advertising revenue. Then you don't want to piss any of those guys off, because you might be finished, right? And then you also get evil entrepreneurial journalism blackmail, where you'll get, we know this about you, or we're going to write this about you, unless you buy 30 million or 50 million won worth of advertising, we will write this very negative story about you.
Just overt blackmail like that.
Yeah, that happens all the time, and we've been subject to that too. We had some. Again, I shouldn't mention who they are. There's a paid subscription news website that's part of a bigger financial news website. Released one article that was very, very critical of our beer company. The journalist then called us and said, well, this is potentially a series of articles. There are 4 articles I'm planning about you, and they're all negative. We can either release all of them, or we can sell you some advertising, and then they'll go away.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah, it happens all the time, though, and any company in Korea that's gone anywhere will have been subject to this at some point. So, in a way, I was glad when it happened, because we're obviously doing well enough to be blackmailable, right? They obviously think we have some money.
They assume your revenue must be high enough to afford the rates.
Yeah. This kind of stuff goes on. So, the journalist who joins a big paper here, perhaps they go in with lofty ideals, and after a year or two, they're just, it's so depressing, because either they're being pushed to do things like that, or they're doing clickbait. Well, mind you, clickbait's everywhere. I mean, that's not just Korea, but it's especially bad here because there's so many media outlets, and there are so few big advertisers that have the ability to really pull strings. Yes, I think it's tougher for a journalist here. So there are times where I felt that I have a bit more leeway to say things than local journalists do.
What do you read?
So in Korea, I always read Joseon and Hangyeore, because they're the most opposite, the opposite ends of the political spectrum here. So I tend to think that read them both and average them out, and you might get something that's vaguely reasonable.
What about English sources? I find Reuters coverage to be very good.
Yeah.
Wall Street Journal, John Chang. Alistair, he's over in Japan now, but they do great work as well. What's your go-to when North Korea launches a missile, or Gordon Ramsay threatens to kick your ass?
I just hear about that.
Just Korean things. Where do you go first?
Okay, so if it's something domestic, the two I've just mentioned, if it's an English language thing, a domestic thing, then probably Korea Times, actually. I mean, it's a really mixed bag, the Korea Times, but there is a lot of useful stuff in it. For the foreign press, I love the FT. I always read the FT, and my only regret, or well, not regret, but the only downside of the FT, I just wish that they had a normal newspaper. I wish they wrote about non-financial stuff. Yeah, I wish they were like the New York Times, or I mean, because I used to write for The Economist, so I like The Economist too. These days in the UK, The Guardian writes a lot about Korea, a lot about South Korea, like cultural stuff. I mean, I'm not saying they always know what they're talking about because they don't have a person here in Korea, and usually you can tell if an article has been written about Korea by someone who doesn't live here. It's the information may be correct, but it's just a bit off. It's a bit the overall tone, the overall feel of the article is a bit weird. And so you can tell, but generally, I think no English language paper is as interested in Korea as The Guardian, and I don't know why that is, but anyway, I'm happy for them to be doing it.
Why are you interested in Korea? I mean, as we mentioned, 2002 was your first time visiting here, but here we are in 2017. You're still here.
Yeah. I've been back and forth. I've lived here for a total of about 7.5 years altogether. But why am I here? I think if you have a good friend here, that's a really good friend. You really go to great lengths to help each other. There's a refreshing lack of cynicism here, and as a Brit, it may sound like a strange thing to say because we have this culture of sarcasm and irony. Everything in Britain is coated in layers of irony, and you can never be completely serious about anything. You can always, I like you, or I love you, or I mean, there's not much of that in the UK. Sometimes I want a little bit of just kind of direct emotional honesty, and I find that you get a lot of that in Korea. Prosaically, there's always something going on in Korea. There's always a new thing. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but it's never dull. There's opportunity to start businesses or get involved in new projects. So the beer thing, for example, I mean, Britain, my country has, hundreds of breweries and a long culture of, making different types of ale and cider and lager and whatever. And so does pretty much anywhere in Europe. And so the kind of thing I've done here with beer, it wouldn't have been relevant or possible in the UK. Although there's a wave of craft beer companies coming through in the UK as well, but we wouldn't have had that opportunity to just start 4 years ago and become like the number one craft beer company in the UK.
Right. What you're doing here is revolutionary. And when people are going to the booth to try a beer, it could very well be the very first time they've tried that
Often
kind
it
of
is,
beer.
yeah. Often it is. It's a privilege and a beautiful thing to be able to do that.
Well, on the flip side of that, is there anything that you don't like about living here?
And there's not much that I really don't like, but there are a few minor annoyances, shall we say. So these days, I mean, I live quite near to Hongdae, the student area. I'm probably about a 10-minute walk away from there, a very peaceful area called Yeonhidong. But anyway, if I go around Hongdae, every day these days, I'll get these sort of religious cult people coming up to me, and they ask me, "Do you know where the cinema is? Do you know where this place or that place is?" Really, I mean, if you're a Korean, you're in Korea. Why would you ask a foreigner directions? You wouldn't, right? So there's something going on. But okay, fine. Well,
clearly they're becoming more accepting.
Yeah, right. At first,
multicultural
this is great. But then after it happened a couple of times, hang on. So I'll say, I don't know, or turn left and blah blah blah, and then they'll go, oh, thank you. Oh, and do you have a religion? It's so transparent. And then I'll get this. Or they'll ask me something like, are you interested in Korean culture? And, well, yeah, but I know what comes next. What comes next is we're organizing a event for foreigners in Korea to teach you about Korean culture. And would you come to this place, which is usually bloody miles away? And we'd like to tell you about hanbok, or Korean food, or ways of making kimchi. What they're doing is selling you a religious cult. So to anyone who's listening to this who hasn't lived in Korea, who's just got here, someone comes up to you in the street, particularly in an area where there are lots of foreigners like Hongdae or Gwangham and Itaewon, and they ask you if you're interested in Korean culture and would you like to go to a exhibition of Korean art or something like that. Don't go, because it's a religious cult.
All right, so to recap, the good things about Korea, emotional honesty. The bad things, cults.
Yeah, there's a lot of those. Yeah.
You know, I've read a lot of op-eds these days about how to solve the North Korean crisis, and usually they're around 700 to 800 words. It takes me, maybe 5-6 minutes to read it. So, in 5 or 6 minutes, could you tell us how do we solve
No, I can't.
the North Korean crisis?
I can't tell you how to solve the North Korean crisis. I think it's something to be managed rather than solved. I don't know how you would solve it without a war. I think if there's anything that's worse than North Korea, it's a second Korean war. Yeah, so I think that North Korea has clearly never had a capability like the one it's demonstrated very recently this year. And also today, in fact. I think the US has not had a president like the one it has right now. Things are fundamentally quite different. I think for the first time, I'm somewhat worried about the future in Korea. I'm not leaving, but in the past, it's always been, it's just North Korea. It's just the saber rattling or making a bit of noise, and we just ignore them. And as a former journalist as well, we always report, people in South Korea don't care. They're not worried. So by extension, neither should you be. And so when your parents call you, you're a foreigner living in Korea. Your parents call you, get out. What are you doing? It's a dangerous place. Then you just come on. But this time it is. I mean, it feels different, and I think it is different. I'm not saying I think there's going to be a war, but I think there's an unacceptably high possibility of one. I still don't think it's it's not 50% or anything like that. But anything greater than 0 is too much.
What do you think is different? Is it just the people at the top, the people that are making decisions? Is it the actual provocations by the North Korean state? What has changed between, say, now and a year ago?
As I said, North Korea has now demonstrated a certain capability. If it wanted to, it could fire ICBMs at the US. And you've got a US president. He doesn't. I don't think he leaves much in terms of an off-ramp. I mean, if this happens, we will completely destroy North Korea. He'll make statements like that. Or he'll make personal attacks on Kim Jong-un. Now, with North Korea, we're used to them insulting everyone. It's just the way they do things. And, it's not, I don't approve of it. It's not good. But we know that it's just the way they are. But if you're North Korea, you look at someone like Trump and he's saying, maybe we'll completely destroy our country, little rocket man. That's something new for them. And perhaps in a strategic sense, perhaps if this were a board game or something, that would be a good strategy. But I think there's too much at stake here to be doing things like that. So it does concern me. I think there's more possibility of either miscalculation or just if ego gets in the way from either side. How do you back down from it now? It's become very personal.
Do you sense a difference on the ground as well? As you mentioned, it seems that any news written in English about Korea is inevitably going to focus, or at least throw in some sort of paragraph about the North Korean crisis, right? Do you sense a difference among Koreans, among the domestic press, among the way that people are talking here in Seoul?
Yeah, I think there's a somewhat more concern than there was. I mean, generally, people don't talk about it so much. It's not as though you go to a pub or somewhere and everyone's talking about North Korea. It's definitely not the case. But I think there's slight more of a sense now that maybe something could happen. But again, it's not. I still think that people in South Korea are not concerned enough. I used to be one of these journalists who go, South Koreans don't care, so neither should you. Don't worry. Things are a bit more worrying, and yet South Koreans continue about their business as though nothing had changed. It's understandable. I mean, some of it's fatalism as well. It's, if it happens, then we'll all be dead in 5 minutes, and there's nothing we can do about it. So just forget about it, and that's very understandable, of course.
Well, as the situation escalates, do you see any off ramps that are either apparent to you or that you think we should be exploring in greater depth or taken more seriously?
First of all, there's always the possibility of a fudge, something that, some kind of deal that makes every side save face and ends up with North Korea essentially keeping its nukes and, perhaps throwing a bone to Trump, and Trump can come out and say, look, we got this. I mean, if there's always the possibility of that, and I would even encourage that. I think that's better than the possibility of conflict. I don't think North Korea will ever give up its nuclear weapons. Yeah, I think that's clearly something that's long gone now. They want to go into any discussion from a position of strength, in which they feel they're on parity with the US.
So you don't believe that they are offensively minded, that they're building these weapons?
I don't know. Yeah, I think that. I mean, there's a lot of talk about this. Do they want to merely secure their state against any potential, attack from the US or from South Korea, or do they intend to bully South Korea, or do they intend to reunify under their banner? I don't know, frankly, and maybe they don't even know. Maybe they start from a position of the former, and then if things go their way, they think, oh, well, maybe we can go further with this. I don't know. Like, say you get the whole Brian Myers theory. This is clearly going to be offensively minded. I mean, I
right.
don't.
And if it wasn't, why would they be doing the one thing that could invite a first strike? You already have conventional deterrence in the way of artillery, in the way of chemical weapons. You have a demonstrated nuclear capacity, which doesn't necessarily need to be mounted on an ICBM. And this has more or less protected the regime in both North and South.
But how do you threaten
Korea,
America then? I mean, if you're Kim Jong-un, you feel you have to threaten America. You have to deter America, rather. And maybe you calculate that, well, okay, perhaps you hadn't banked on Trump being different. Perhaps you would think, okay, someone like Obama, someone like Hillary Clinton, had she won. If you come along and say, look, we can now attack you directly with nukes. We can strike anywhere within your, not one of your allies, but you. And if you can say that to them, then they're, okay, all right, never mind us. Sorry, folks. And then you've secured your state. Maybe I imagine that's how they think.
No, I agree with you. I was trying to play the contrarian there for a second.
But also, I would say, in the case of this takeover theory, reunify under the North Korean banner, I think it's academic, an academic thing in both senses. I think that even if that's what they want to do, I don't think they can do. Maybe if they believe they can do that, I think they're very mistaken. The average South Korean is clearly never going to accept a North Korea-dominated, reunified Korean state. And even if that were to happen, I mean, I don't think it will happen in a million years, but if it did happen, it would change North Korea more than it would change South Korea.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you have to assume that the upper echelons of Pyongyang elite are aware of this, or at least, even if they don't necessarily understand the gulf between North and South Korea, that they're at least marginally aware that they are at a huge disadvantage conventionally.
Right.
Not just from a security standpoint, but economically, culturally, politically. And so a reunified peninsula, if this is the ultimate goal, right, is going to be just so unfeasible.
Right. No, I would agree with that, actually, yeah. You've got 50 million people here versus 25. GDP of something like 40 times greater than that of North Korea. Global businesses like Samsung in the way as well. You've got a populace in South Korea that either disdains or considers North Korea to be, kind of exotic and ridiculous. I think most people would probably consider North Korea in that regard. There's a strain of kind of right-wing thought in South Korea. There's this dormant group of super lefties who are waiting to rise up and join the revolution against the South Korean state from within. I think that's absolutely
Kim Il-sung was waiting on them in 1950.
Yeah, but yeah, he wouldn't find too many people like that today if he were around. Yeah, I mean, if I look at my friends in Korea, you ask about North Korea, they don't even want to talk about it. But if they do, it's just disdain and almost embarrassment to be, even connected by a word, Korea, and a language and historic culture to a place that, they consider to be really, just odd.
Yeah, I think that was
so different to themselves.
That was very much reflected in polling in the recent election, where people were asked, Korean voters were asked, what is the most important issue to you? And I think it was 20-something% had answered security. Ostensibly North Korea, but I'm sure some of that was Dokdo. People are concerned about jobs. They're concerned about school for their kids. They're concerned about getting married. Very familiar troubles for an American or a Brit as yourself.
Of course, it's natural. And yeah, I mean, these days, everywhere you go in the developed, wealthy world, there's this concern about inequality of jobs or house prices, and it's exactly the same here. I mean, so I was talking to my Korean teacher about this. I asked her about North Korea and reunification. Would you want reunification? Because, of course, publicly you have to everyone, reunification, yes. I asked her reunification, and she went, 최악이야. That's the worst, right? I can't even bear to think about something like that. It's hard enough to live here, get a job, and get a house, go to university and do well by South Korean standards. And then imagine another layer of you competing with 25 million North Koreans who do anything that you can do much cheaper and probably with more kind of vigor and post-socialist enthusiasm. I don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, it's just an extra layer of headaches, an extra layer of trouble to worry about. Yeah, I just don't think there's much interest. I mean, older people perhaps who either remember or had parents who had loved ones in North Korea they're separated from, friends and family and so on. Yeah, it's something more tangible. It's something emotionally tangible, if you like. It's more of an abstract thing, I think, to any young person.
Certainly, there is a lot of sensationalism when it comes to coverage of the Korean Peninsula.
Whenever you see whenever you see anything related to North Korea in the international press, you'll always have these pictures of protesters, burning North Korean flags, the old people, or you'll have the kind of lefty protesters out. What they don't tell you is there are probably about 50 or 100 of those people at that particular protest that they're taking the picture of.
Well, in a similar vein to that, what else do you think Western media gets so wrong about North or South Korea?
The scariest one to me is that North Korea is irrational. I don't think it's irrational at all. I think they're crazy like a fox. Here you've got a regime, a state that's been run by the same family for around 70 years, a country that was supposed to be communist, and they've had hereditary successions. They've had a massive famine around 20 years ago, which hundreds of thousands, possibly more than 1 million people died. The fall of the Soviet Union, you've got the rise of South Korea as a democratic and economic power, the rise of China as an economic power. And in spite of all of those things, you've got this one family, is brutal and really doesn't do anything for anyone other than for themselves. And yet they've held on to power for all this time. And you don't do that by being crazy. You do that by being really smart. I think they've perfected the art of dictatorship. And I think the last thing that Kim Jong-un actually wants is a war. But then you get people in the more hysterical media outlets, particularly in the US, and you get certain politicians in the US who go, North Korea, they're crazy, they're irrational. They might attack us at any time.
If there's going to be a war, it's going to be over there.
Yeah, there's the Lindsey Graham quote that I despise so much. It is going to be over here if it happens. Nobody in America has anything to worry about, I think. People in Seoul maybe have something to worry about.
Now, Kim Jong-un may be a rational actor, but there's certainly a lot of debate about different power circles in Pyongyang and what kind of influence this kid, as you put it, really has. Do you buy into that argument, or do you really believe that it's the Kim family and everybody else?
This is Pyongyangology, and who really knows? But from the people I talk to, the people whose opinions I respect, and from generally what I read, I think we could probably say that his power has increased over time. You have a young king who comes into power, and it is very dependent on his dad's old people. Over time, we've seen that certain... The one I'm interested in recently, Hwang Byung-seo, he's called, has been for a few years now considered this indispensable figure, this number 2 figure who's from this organization and guidance department, which was as an organization very, very powerful, very influential. And now he's been pushed out. Probably he'll come back later. The aim is to bring him down a few rungs. And I think the fact that that's possible would suggest that he's now in charge to me. Not to say that he can't do anything he wants within North Korea. I think the balance is shifting towards him.
And aside from regime stability, what do you think Kim Jong-un wants?
I think he wants to continuously increase his power within North Korea. And I think he wants to... I do believe he wants to develop the North Korean economy whilst maintaining control, which is obviously a tightrope situation. When he gives speeches, he'll often refer to economic development. He'll say this, it makes sense, in the future we won't have to tighten our belts. You see a lot of new development in a place like Pyongyang. Of course, that's very much aimed at the elite as well. But you do see this signaling of development, big new buildings, and more of a focus on technology.
Joints
and all this kind of stuff, which really is only available to a certain kind of person with money in Pyongyang. But still, the signaling is there. I think that's quite important.
So with that in mind, this idea that you could somehow, incentivize Pyongyang elite or the well-connected into defecting, or at least turning on the Kim family.
I think there would be just too much fear. If you're a North Korean elite, if you're one of the new money class, or if you're one of, if you're an elite military officer or a civil servant, your life is actually quite good, possibly very good. And why would you want to rock the boat by doing that? I mean, if you succeed, you may end up being a taxi driver in Seoul, and if you fail, you and your whole family will go to a prison camp. And so, is it really worth it? As for defection, possibly. I mean, you have to be able to get to people, though, don't you? And also, they do practice this 연좌제, I think this family punishment system. So 3 generations of your family will be punished if you do something that upsets the leadership. So yeah, I mean, if I were an elite government officer in North Korea, I'd like to think I'd be a brave person, but I probably wouldn't. Yeah, cost-benefit analysis,
Now you're speaking like an MBA. Could you share a little bit about North Korea Confidential? Some of your conclusions then I would like to kind of revisit now 5 years later, but, writing that book, what was it like, and what did you find to be the biggest surprises?
So what was it like? So I wrote it with a friend, James Pearson, the Reuters correspondent here. He's very knowledgeable about North Korea. He knows a lot more than I do. I suppose I was more the writer, so I would often interview him. Or James, what do you think about this, that, and the other? And he would give me information that he'd found from whichever sources. And yeah, of course, I had sources of my own. And he's reading Chinese, speaking Chinese as well. And I'm better at the Korean side. Of course, both of us. Well, I don't know. On a good day, I speak English quite well. So yeah, that was the division of labor. We tend to see North Korea in a very similar way. There weren't any big arguments, or I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example.
No, man, sunshine totally worked.
Although, James got married recently, so there's the
congratulations, James, by the way.
So he's been busy with life and with Reuters. So I was doing most of the writing, and he provided a lot of most of the information, I would say. I think the speed of change in North Korea surprised us, and the extent to which young people are, particularly young women, more interested in fashion than you would imagine. And you hear things like in a city there'll be somebody who performs the double eyelid operation on people for $2 or $3, something like that. Someone who's not even a proper doctor, but will just do that to make your eyes look big, give them the double eyelid.
I'm imagining something similar to the yogurt ajumas that you see around here in Seoul, but instead of selling yogurt, you're selling double eyelid surgery. So you open up your ice chest, and then there you go. You got all the equipment there.
I mean, it's probably the price difference isn't probably that great either between the two. One story we heard that was just too good to not put in the book was the North Korean style love motel. We heard this from a few people. We got it from one person, and then we asked a few others, is this true? We'd always try and find 3 people who didn't know each other to say the same thing. If 3 people who don't know each other all say that the grass is blue in North Korea, then maybe it is, until we go there ourselves and see that it's not. Generally, that was our standard for accepting something. Because in North Korea, there's no statistics that you can rely on. You can't go and interview. You can't survey. You can't ask 1,000 North Koreans in North Korea, what do you think about the marshal? So anyway, 3 people didn't know each other would say something like, well, in our city or in our hometown, if you're in a relationship, you're not married, you live with your parents, and you want to have a romantic interlude, there's a place you can go, and it'll be someone's house. You knock on the door, and maybe in the afternoon, it'll be a family home. You knock on the door, and the kids may be in school. The father might be working, and the lady of the house will be at home. And you give her some money, and she'll leave for an hour or 2, and then you can use her house as a love motel. And then she'll come back, and she'll probably have been down to the illegal street market or semi-legal street market with that money and bought food or whatever for the house. It's so capitalistic, actually. It's one of the interesting things that isn't really appreciated about North Korea. I mean, it's not a capitalist country, but it's a capitalistic country. I would call it not a communist state, but a feudalistic state with emerging capitalist characteristics. And the fact that you can, in North Korea, you can pay to go to someone's house and have sex there. That's not the North Korea that people think of. And so that's it's kind of a maybe a trivial or funny example, but to me it just shows exactly why I thought that book had to be written.
Now, does that necessarily mean that the regime is in trouble? I mean, certainly
no.
Enjoying K-pop videos on your Chinese-made smartphone is a lot different than wanting participative democracy.
Right.
And so do you see a direct link between these market forces entering the equation and a demand for greater political representation, civil rights?
Not really, no. I think the idea that, oh, well, North Koreans like K-pop, young Koreans like K-pop, therefore, they'll also want South Korean democracy is a bit of a jump. And I mean, if you can imagine it in North Korea, what would it take to produce that? The kind of mass revolution and protest that would not be allowed to exist. I mean, you can't organize in North Korea. I mean, you can't organize a sports team without it being part of ultimately a government body. You couldn't just have a bunch of people who decide to start a sports team. So if you can't do that, how could you bring out hundreds of thousands of people on the streets to protest against the regime? And if that did happen, what would the regime response be? I almost wouldn't want that to happen because of what the response from the authorities would be. I don't think it would succeed. I think it would be put down in the most brutal fashion. Even if people imagine democracy or want democracy, I don't know how you get from the point we're at today to democracy. The territory that is today's North Korea, I mean, you've had thousands of years of monarchy, an interlude of Japanese imperialism, then you've got another monarchy. I mean, in a way, South Korea is the more exceptional case in having become this very rambunctious, very successful democracy. And within the region, South Korea is much more... I mean, I think both countries are exceptional for many reasons, but the political exception is more South Korea than North Korea. North Korea is just is an extreme example of dictatorship which exists in most countries throughout the region.
So what are the changes that you see as a result of the forces that you described so well in your book?
There's more cynicism. So even though I say that I don't think North Korea is going to undergo huge political change, I think there's more cynicism towards authority, a lot more corruption. I think during the Kim Il-sung era, I mean, if you talk to sort of older defectors or people who know about what North Korea used to be like during the Kim Il-sung era, there's perhaps still an element of idealism. We're trying to build a better country here. And then as it became clear that wasn't happening, and then you end up through the famine and the very corrupt Kim Jong-il era, and now this third generation of the same family in charge. I mean, how can you possibly be anything but cynical about that? So we're seeing much more of that, and people willing to bribe to get ahead, and government officials willing to take bribes because you can't live on the official salary. Then the emerging new capitalism of North Korea from above and below. So I'll start with from below. It's first of all, it's allowing people to make a much better living than before, and it's also it's enabling them to live on the back of their own labor, and that's it results in a different kind of mentality to in the past where you get your ration from the state, everything came from the state. So there's an emotional and even perhaps logical kind of distance that's emerged between state and people. But again, that's not to say that you could have revolution or anything like that. So, and I never want to make that jump. Also, I think family relations have changed somewhat. So you'll have women as the breadwinner in many, many cases, many households now. Men traditionally, of course, North Korea is a very patriarchal country. And you'd have the man of the house would have an official state job, but his salary over the years has become more or less worthless. Following the famine, it was left to the woman of the house to go out and make money. And so she'd be down the local street market, or she'd be buying any kind of goods from China that had been imported or whatever, selling them, trading them, and so on. Then the family comes to rely on her labor, and the man has become effectively useless. It changes the power dynamic within the family. Now, it's equalizing to some extent now because men are able to bribe their way out of their official job. So they're both able to work now, but they do both work. And so you have a more equal relationship between men and women. That's not to say it is equal at all, but it's less obviously divergent than how it used to be. From the top, you've got like a very almost kind of structured system, it seems, where if you're part of a government body that has a state-owned enterprise under its umbrella, let's say you're a civil servant, your official salary is basically $1 or something, but you're really spending your days working for that state-owned enterprise. You might be paid $300 or $400 or $500 if you're doing very well, and that's really your salary. Your government department really it can't exist without that business. So that business is perhaps importing goods from China, selling them in Pyongyang, or maybe it's brewing beer or whatever. But that's where your salary really comes from. If you're ambitious, if you have some connections, if you have some money, access to money, you may bribe your boss and say, actually, I'd like to start my own business within this business. And if your boss likes you and takes your money, then you may end up having your own business. And let's say that you make, in South Korean money, 100 million won. You would have to give, say, 30 million upwards at the end of the year. Now, that's your official profit. You declare a profit maybe of 30 million won. You fix, you doctor the books, which is easy in North Korea because it's mostly handwritten and there's no, trustworthy record of anything in North Korea. You cook the books, you pay your 30 million won, and you keep the 70, something like that. And that's how this sort of elite business works in North Korea. But then again, very, very cynical if you compare it to the communist ideal. But actually, if you compare it to, say, how things work in your country or my country, not massively different. That 30% you may just consider tax.
So you don't envision a ground roots kind of overthrowing the campaign or demonstrations demanding greater political representation?
No, I can't imagine it. I wish North Korea would change. I wish that the North Korean state didn't exist. I just can't see how that would happen in that way. I can't see how people would think to get together in such huge numbers and protest and overcome any fear they might have. The fear would be immense. I can't imagine how the authorities would allow it to happen.
And on that uplifting note, let's switch to the rapid fire round.
Okay.
In Korea or anywhere else, what is the absolute best beer you have ever had?
Right. This isn't, I think, the best beer in the world, but the beer that showed me something would be Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, because I was in London one day and an American friend said, hey, why don't you try this? And I've never had ale really before. It was all about lager in those days, lager. And I tried it. This is great. What is this? And then that opened up a world of Pale Ale, IPA, just different styles of beer. And so that was my gateway drug. So I would say Sierra Nevada Pale Ale.
An unlikely choice, I have to say. So when the UK come to South Korea trying to negotiate a bilateral trade agreement, which, of course, everybody around the world is already jumping to get access to that market, what do you think would be wise for them to really emphasize? So what kind of products or industry would South Korea be able to provide? And conversely, what does the UK do well that South Korea could really benefit from?
TV comedy, sarcasm, irony. I don't know if you can sell it, but design, music, intangible stuff. Yeah, we're quite good at that.
Soft power stuff.
Yeah. Nothing physical, nothing that involves factories, and that's all dead. I mean,
so
I'm kidding. I mean, that's I'm going too far with that, but yeah, I mean, it's
What can South Korea offer?
All of those things that we don't make anymore. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know if we'll be getting a lot out of Korea FTA in the UK. I know that the EU Korea FTA was, I think, to the disappointment of a lot of people in Korea, the Korea EU FTA was very beneficial to the EU. The EU used to have a trade deficit with Korea, now it really doesn't. And that's largely because of the FTA.
That was a Park and Hay creation, was it not?
Believe so. I mean, it was probably being discussed before, but yeah. Anyway,
it's like the course.
I don't want to blame Park and Hay for everything.
Yeah, right.
So I think I'm quite sure that if we come knocking on Moon Jae-in's door for an FTA, the terms are not going to be anywhere near as favourable as they were when we were part of the EU FTA. Yeah, as you may be able to tell, I'm completely against Brexit.
You've got 24 hours,
mm-hmm.
unlimited resources, and your best friend is visiting you in Korea for 24 hours. What do you do?
I mean, anything you do in Korea that's fun does involve booze at some point.
Anything with booze.
Yeah,
is
pretty much.
Your final answer.
Yeah. So it's just, having lots of money just enables you to buy better booze.
Aside from booze,
How would you sell somebody on Korea? It is a growing international destination. One of the reasons why I started this show, and I've had the opportunity to work with and meet with some really talented, wonderful people that are from all over the world, not just on the show, but in other capacities as well. But if you are talking to somebody on the fence, how do you sell them on this country?
I think the reason I struggle with that last question is that it's hard to point out one or two particular things that, wow, you're in Korea, you've got to see this, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. I don't think there's that much of that in Korea. It's more about experiences. And if you have a night out in Korea, probably unusual, fun, awesome things will happen that wouldn't happen in a night out in London. Like you'll meet really interesting people or
join a cult.
Quite possibly, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's one night where I was in some club in Hongdae. This is years ago now, and I got talking to this girl, and she had a friend of hers, and then her friend had met some guy, and we all just randomly decided to get on a train to Busan, and we got there at about 9 a.m. and just sort of collapsed, and it ended up being a pretty boring day in Busan because we were all just completely exhausted and hungover. But just the fact that stuff like that can happen is pretty cool. You come to Korea, the kind of friends you make here, a good friend here is a really great friend. You will always get more than you imagined I think Korea is about taking a leap of faith sometimes as a foreigner, as an outsider. There are things that will make very little sense to you when you get here. But sometimes you just kind of go with it, and the result you get will be amazing. So like with the booth, for example, a person who I didn't know, who was a friend of a friend, came to me and just said, do you want to start this business with me and my girlfriend? And, they had a particular vision and an idea of how to get there. And I was like, oh, yeah, what the hell, I'll do that. And it paid off in a way I would never have expected. And so Korea is, I think it's not about, you've got to go up this particular tower, or you've got to see this particular museum, or you've got to go to this kind of club or whatever. It's more about, you will meet interesting and amazing people, and things will happen that you wouldn't expect. So it's indefinable in some way. I think people don't come here enough. There are still too few people coming here. But people who do come here, so I'm talking more about Westerners or Europeans that I've seen, will come here on a business trip, or perhaps a friend of theirs was here, and so they just kind of came over. It wasn't about Korea, it was about some other reason. And somehow they find that, wow, this is a really amazing place, and why does no one ever say come to Korea? There's nothing like a forbidden city, or an Eiffel Tower, or these kind of iconic things that you have to see and do. There's something more indefinable, and I think that relates to people and experiences.
That was really well put. Have you ever thought about being a writer?
I tried it once, but no, didn't really sell very well.
Didn't really pan out. So last question. What are 3 books that you would recommend to better understand South Korea, North Korea, or just 3 books that you really, really enjoy?
Books on Korea.
Not your books.
Yeah. Drink my beer, read my books. Okay. South Korea, there are really very few books on South Korea. That's probably why mine's still in print and why people read it, because there's really no competition. There's Mike Breen. He's probably the only one who writes about South Korea. And his recent one is called The New Koreans. It's an update of it's not really an update. It's more like a completely new book. But it's called The New Koreans. I think that's really, really good. I mean, it's his subjective opinion about a lot of stuff, but it's a very well-reasoned subjective opinion, and very well-written, and often very amusing. And so, I definitely would recommend that. And there's a lot of stuff in there that even if you've been born here and lived here all your life, you would read it. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of that. North Korea, I think for me, in English, the gold standard is Under the Loving Care of the Father Leader by Bradley Martin. That was very useful for our own book too, just historical background about Kim Il-sung and the family. That's a really great, well-researched book. And then one that doesn't get mentioned a lot is my friend Sebastian Folletti. He's a Le Figaro correspondent, and he wrote this book with a young lady called Kim Il-sung, who's a North Korean defector. And it's there are a lot of these defector memoirs, How I Escaped from North Korea, this kind of stuff. Just the way it's written, it reads like a thriller.
What's the book called?
Yeah, it's called 1,000 Miles to Freedom. And so by Sebastian Folletti and Kim Il-sung, they're called. And it's just it's a short, very pacey book. It reads like a thriller. But you're learning something about the life of a defector from North Korea and a family, and I mean, often it's very, as you would imagine, very heartbreaking, very sad, and then quite uplifting as well at the end. And it's if you like the kind of book like A Thousand Splendid Suns, this kind of novel, it's it's well worth a read. Another one, I don't know if there's an English version. I mean, I've read about half of this book. It's called 나는 평양의 모니카. I'm Monica of Pyongyang. It's this lady called Monique Macias who she's from Equatorial Guinea. She is the daughter of a very colourful dictator, interesting dictator, shall we say, from Equatorial Guinea, who was sent to North Korea in I think the early 80s. And she largely grew up in North Korea, and it's about like this young African girl who grows up in Pyongyang, and I know her now, and we're friends, and she's a really lovely person. But if her mother tongue is basically North Korean. One time we met in Seoul, coffee in the afternoon, or whatever. And she's talking to people in the cafe like a North Korean, and it just blows people's minds. Is amazing. But anyway, that it's the kind of personal history that you couldn't really. I mean, she must be the only person in the world, other than a brother. They grew up together in North Korea, but there must be nobody else in the world with a personal history like that. It's just so interesting to read. So I know it's going to come out in English at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, you're very welcome, Harris. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Daniel. He was incredibly gracious with his time, and I really learned a lot from our conversation. I hope you all did as well. If you'd like to connect with Daniel, you can find him on Twitter at DanielR.Tudor, or visit him at the booth and try his beer. There are several locations around Seoul and one in California. Go to www.thebooth.co.kr for more information. And also, buy his books. I recommend North Korea Confidential and Korea, the Impossible Country. They are very, very good. Can be found on Amazon. As always, a big thank you to the audience. If you like the Settlers of Seoul podcast, please rate us on iTunes. It's the fastest way to help us grow. Show notes and bios can be found at settlersofseoul.com. We're also on Facebook and Twitter at Settlers of Seoul, though admittedly not very active, just kind of posting new episodes. Anyway, thank you so much.